Hi, Jason. This is Mr. Burdick, and I'm going to read to you from Matt Christopher's novel Dirt Bike Racer. When I was a little boy, Matt Christopher was my favorite writer. I really liked the football novel Cracker Jack Halfback, and I really liked the baseball novel Catcher with a Glass Arm. Those are the only two I remember right now. This one was written in 1977 when I was already 15. Called Dirt Bike Racer by the great Matt Christopher. To Ted and Pearl. Dirt Bike Racer. Chapter 1. Ordell, New York, August 1977. The severe windstorm that lashed at the Bayside City last night also took its toll of a houseboat that had been moved at Tecumseh Harbor. Torn from its moorings, the houseboat was blown down Pumpkinhead Lake, where high waves thrashed it about mercilessly. According to its owners, Mr. and Mrs. Stuart Klein of River Park, much of the equipment on the houseboat was lost in the lake, including a new set of dishes, a stove, a color television set, and a dirt bike. Tony talked me into it, and it wasn't easy. You would think that because my father was a former scuba diving pro, he taught it, I would follow gladly in his footsteps, right? Not so. I only went into the sport because of my father. For some reason, water doesn't appeal to me that much. Anyway, after about 15 minutes on the hotline, Tony and I hung up. I turned to glance at the clock in the kitchen and caught my mother looking at it too. She had the pantry door open, taking inventory of the depleting stock and making a list of it on a pad. Well, she said in that half-serious, half-amused way of hers, 17 minutes of a very scintillating conversation. Broke the record by about 5 to 8 minutes. What was that all about, anyway? Tony wants me to go scuba diving with him, I said. Where? Pumpkinhead Lake. Pumpkinhead Lake is about 3/4 of a mile... Oh, sorry, that wasn't the mother. I thought that was the mother talking. Cut.
No, keep going.
Edit.
No, keep going.
Pumpkinhead Lake is about 3/4 of a mile south of our home, and an ideal lake for scuba diving. It's small, only 6 miles long, a half-mile wide at its broadest point, and 115 feet deep at its lowest point. We never scuba dived at anywhere near that depth, of course, but I like to mention it because my father has. Not once, but several times. He's a really skilled diver, that guy. Where on Pumpkinhead Lake? My mother asked. Off Turkey Point, I said. That's about 2 miles from the north end of the lake. Pumpkinhead, running from northeast to southwest, looks like a blue slash mark on a map. It's been stocked with trout and bass, and sometimes my father and I, or Tony and I, take out our fish poles and bring home a mess of them. How deep is it there, and is anybody else going besides you and Tony? Oh, Ma, you know I never dive more than 25 or 30 feet, I told her, and it's less than that there, and no, nobody else is going. Now, can I get a move on? I told Tony I'd be there in 15 minutes. She smiled. Whenever I see my mother smile, I always think that she has such white teeth she'd be a knockout on one of those TV commercials. Okay, scuba man, move on, she said. Thank you, I said, and I bowed out of the room. I got my gear, piled it into the rear basket of my bike, and pedaled off to Tony's house. Tony, whose full name is Tony Franco, lives on Pine Street. I've known him all my life, which is going on to 13 years. But it's only been the last couple of years that we have become pals. Don't ask me why. It just happened. I didn't see him around when I got there. Are you looking for I'll try that one again. Are you looking for Tony, Ron? Mrs. Franco called from the kitchen door. Yeah, I said. He said he'd be waiting for me. Here I am, I heard a voice yell. Tony's voice seemed about an octave higher than an owl's. I'd recognize it anywhere. I looked around. Where? I said. Here, he said, underneath the porch. Wait a sec, I'll be right out. Is that okay?
I don't know what an octave higher than an owl's is. An owl like, woo.
Yeah.
So I guess he's, woo. Yeah.
That wasn't even an octave, though.
Oh, yeah.
So it's way up. It's almost supersonic.
Yeah.
It's like dogs can hear it.
Dogs can hear it.
Okay, so anyway, where we are back at the story is that
Right.
Ron has just gotten to Tony's house, and Tony, silly high-voiced kid, appears to be underneath the porch. Here, he said, underneath the porch. Wait a sec, I'll be right out. His mother chuckled. Nirvana chased a mouse or something under there and can't find her way out, so Tony had to crawl in after her. Nirvana is their cat, a calico feline with 6 toes on each paw. As for me, I wouldn't give a dime for any cat. One scratched me once just because I wanted to pet it. Since then, the wider the gap between a cat and me, the better. A few seconds later, Tony crawled out from under the porch. Nirvana clutched under his right arm. The instant he let her loose, she meowed and bounded off. He got up and brushed himself off. "Dumb cat," he said. "That's the 3rd time she got trapped under there. Too dumb to know how to find a way out."
I don't know if you're going to be able to maintain that voice through the book.
Well,
We'll see.
I think I'll get better at it, actually.
You think? Okay.
Yeah. "Can't you plug up the hole where she goes in?" I asked. He looked at me. "Ever hear of procrastination? That means never do today what you can do tomorrow. It's my dad's favorite motto." I shrugged. "Don't knock it. It has its good points." I looked around for his diving gear. "You ready to go?" "In a minute," he said. He trotted up on the porch and came back down with the gear. Then he got his bike out of the garage, placed the gear into the rear basket, and rode off. "Be home before 5 now," his mother called after him. "I will," he called back to her. We rode through the streets, crossed the bridge on Englewood, then took the shortcut through the park. With the 4th of July just behind us, this was a nice time of year. The trees were flush with green leaves, the grass was like an emerald sea, and the few flowers in bloom were like frosting on a cake. I heard a hum behind us that quickly grew into a roar. A couple of seconds later, 2 motorcyclists sped by us, one on our left, the other on our right. They both goosed their engines as they went by, then fired their plugs to make them sound like pistol shots. This was against the city of Ordell's law, but with no cops around, a minor thing like firing spark plugs wasn't going to stop Lug Minear and Skitch Bentley from having their fun. "Punks," said Tony. "I wonder whose motorcycle they stripped last night." "I'm glad we've got bikes," I said. "There's nothing on these things they could use." "Don't bet on it," said Tony. Twice during the last 2 years, Lug and Skitch had been arrested for stealing parts off someone's motorcycle. The last arrest was about 8 or 9 months ago. Since then, there had been no complaints about stripped bikes, but how long that would last was anybody's guess. In a little while, the 2 came buzzing back again, passing by, with us in the middle. Tony and I waved at them. They didn't wave back. "Big shots," mumbled Tony. Tony and I rode as far as we could out on Turkey Point, which was a strip of land extending out into the lake. A tree grew at the end of it, looking so lonely you wondered how it could survive. There were also some bushes, which we used to hide in as we stripped and put on our trunks and scuba outfits. Tony and I used the single air cylinder tanks, which were plenty for the kind of diving we did. We pulled on our flippers, checked our pressure and depth gauges, and adjusted our face masks with the breathing tubes attached to them. All set, we waded out into the water till it was up to our waists. Then we dove in. We swam out about 100 yards. Tony and I checked back on each other, the old buddy bit, every couple of minutes to see that the other one was all right. We frightened individual fish, some over 2 feet long, and a school of sunfish so enormous you wouldn't believe. All at once I got the scare of my life. I looked up and could see Tony's fast-moving flippers, but nothing else. And then, even the flippers had disappeared. "Tony, you jerk!" I wanted to yell. What he had done, of course, was swim down over a ledge. I flippered hard toward the spot and saw him diving deeper into the water. The position of the sun made it easy to see the underwater contours, and what I saw was a skin diver's dream world. The ledge went straight down like a wall, Weeds grew along the sides, their long, slender leaves waving back and forth, as if they were keeping time to music. But the drop was too deep for Tony and me. It could go down to 40 or 50 feet, maybe more. Neither of us had ever dived more than 30 feet before. I was sure we could, but we had made a promise to our parents. 30 feet was the limit until we got a couple of years older. Then we could dive deeper. Until then... Two bright shining objects suddenly flashed below me. I looked for Tony and saw him swimming toward the left. Whether he had seen the shining objects, I didn't know. Tony's not half as curious as I am. If he saw something strange, he might want to check it out, or he might not. It always depended on how he felt at the moment. Me, I'm like that curious cat. Those two shining objects might not have been anything but bottles, but there was something about them that deserved a closer look. At least in my opinion they did. But I didn't want to swim to them alone. I didn't want to get too wide a gap between Tony and me. You never know when something could happen, to the breathing apparatus, to the pressure gauge, to anything, and you'd want your partner nearby to give you help. I was about to cuss Tony for ignoring that unwritten law when I saw him look back, quickly. Quickly I motioned him to come forward. He trod water a while, staring at me, and I motioned to him again, more insistently this time. Then I pointed down toward the shining objects. I saw him check his depth gauge, and I checked mine. 22 feet, and we'd been swimming about 5 minutes. We had from 8 to 10 minutes of diving time left before we had to surface. I started to motion to him again, but he was already swimming toward me. I turned and headed down toward those two shining objects. I figured they must be about 15 to 20 feet away. I'm sorry, Mom and Dad, but I've just got to see what those things are down there. Gradually, I began to distinguish the outlines of, what do you know, a bike. Not the ordinary pedal-type two-wheeler, but a dirt bike. I think I could do better. Scuba diver and a dirt bike.
There's the dirt bike.
Yep.
There's the scuba diver. There's the flippers he was talking about.
Oh, yeah.
The air tanks.
Yeah,
The
bubbles.
air tanks and bubbles.
Yep.
Are coming out of, what do you call this thing?
What?
What do you call that?
A mask.
The mask, but then what's attached to it that the bubbles come out of?
Snorkel?
The snorkel.
I mean, I don't know if it's a snorkel.
Well, maybe a snorkel. Yep. Stay tuned for chapter 2.